Hey guys, welcome back. This is Blue Forest. So today we're going to do part 5 of the SIG 100 list, where we're looking at each SIG in the game. We're doing an overview, taking a look at what each SIG looks like at very low level, and then again, once they are maxed out at SIG 100, so that you can make more informed decisions about where to feed those signature programs and which bots to buy and dupe from the store. We will also take a look at things like activation rate, because although I am not ranking these SIGs, it is important to look at each signature in isolation from the bot, because some SIGs will activate much more often than others, and some SIGs will just be more beneficial to you than others. So today we're going to do the Scout class. The good news about the Scout class is that most of these SIGs actually have a very high activation rate, and most of them are quite useful. So we will jump in and begin with Jazz. So Jazz, his signature is Exhaustion. This works in tandem with Confusion, which is obviously a very important ability of Jazz. So with Exhaustion, when the opponent is confused, they will lose 1.3% power for each missed attack at SIG 1. If they slip to a lower bar of power, they will be stunned for 1 second. That goes up to 6% power lost at SIG 100. Now, this SIG is nice, it's useful. It does have a high activation rate because you're obviously landing Confusion frequently with those heavies and Special 2, so I like that it's integrated into the kit. And you look at the lost power, you think, okay, 1.5, 2% power, something like that doesn't sound like much, but you have to remember they're going to lose that for every missed attack. So as long as you're a pretty good player, you're dodging, you're evading a lot, it will add up. It's an accumulative SIG in that sense, right? So there will also be times, by the way, where they slip to a lower bar of power and they will be stunned. This is not a game-changing SIG. It's not, going to dramatically improve Jazz, but it certainly does help you out. And the fact that it works with Confusion just is really beneficial. If you are a very diehard Jazz user, he is obviously phenomenal in long fights in particular. It's worth it to invest some into this SIG, maybe get that lost power up to 2%, 3%, because like I said, it's accumulative. It will add up. With that said, it's not the kind of SIG most people are going to feel any need to get up to an incredibly high level, because it's merely a nice SIG. It helps you out, but it's not a game changer. So most people will do just fine with a low to mid level Jazz in terms of his SIG level. You're going to get that stun occasionally. Just remember, though, it is only a 1 second stun. It's a very brief opening, but you do have an impact on the opponent's power, which is always useful. And the fact that it works completely in tandem with Confusion makes it a pretty good SIG with a high activation rate. So that brings us to Prowl. So his SIG is Good Cop. This is an excellent SIG that is also integrated very well into his kit. So this gives him power, which of course is always useful. So this works with his melee buffs, right? So you dash back, you charge up those melee buffs, he can stack them up to 10. Once those buffs are charged up, he will gain some power for every melee buff. At SIG 1, he gains 1.5% power per buff. That goes up to 4% power per buff at SIG 100. Now again, you could look at this and say 1.5% power, 2% power, doesn't seem like much, but that's for every melee buff. And he can get 10 of them, and you will usually want to get 10 of them because it seriously amplifies his melee damage. So even at SIG 1, he's going to get 15% power instantly when he charges up those buffs. At SIG 100, it goes up to 40% power if he has 10 buffs. Now, the interesting thing about Prowl SIG is that it's the kind of SIG that you not only don't need to have maxed out, it's actually, in some instances anyway, can be counterproductive. Prowl SIG really hits the sweet spot at mid-level. The reason for that really just has to do with his Special 1, because his Special 1, of course, is his power-draining special, one of the most widely used in the game, and this is why Prowl is one of the most widely used scouts. He has excellent power control. And the thing is if you have a maxed-out Prowl, there will be times where he ends up getting to a Special 2 too quickly, because he's going to be getting 40% power instantly, along with the power you're getting from just attacking, right? Now, I have played with the SIG 100 Prowl before on a friend's account when I was covering it, and I did get the hang of it, but it did take some getting used to in order to avoid pushing myself to a special 2 when I wanted to use the special 1, because you often will want to use the special 1. So Prowl is the kind of bot that does super well at mid-level. I would say between SIG 40 and 70 is where he really, really shines, because you're still gaining plenty of power. Every time he charges up those buffs, it leads to more specials, whether you want to use a special 1, 2, or 3. It's excellent for, for his power gain. The fact that it pairs with his melee buffs is super, super useful. So if you're going to use Prowl a lot, and many people obviously do, you want to invest in it some, maybe feed him some SIGs, dupe him, buy him when you can, but you don't have to worry about maxing it out. And like I said, for some people, they would find it a little bit frustrating just because the amount of power he will gain at super high level is significant. So it's an excellent SIG, does very, very well at mid-level, and even at low level, it will really help you out. So that brings us to Windblade. So her SIG is Resolution. This is a crit rate SIG, so it increases her crit rate as the fight goes on. So the closer the opponent is to dying, the more often she will crit. So at SIG 5, she will get about up to an 11% additional crit rate. That goes up to a 25% increased crit rate at SIG 100. So it a little bit more than doubles. Now the thing about this SIG is that it's a nice SIG. You can see it in action. You will often see lots of crits with her last special or her last few attacks. But it's definitely not a game changer. It doesn't dramatically improve her. It also, like I said, doesn't scale that much. It maxes out at 25%. So she will do just fine at low or mid SIG level. Because you have to remember, Windblade, she's a scout. She already crits a lot. She has great synergies, like Sword Masters, if you're using the crit-related masteries, along with the damage-related masteries, like Assassin and Sequencer and stuff. That all amplifies her damage and leads to more crits. So this is not the kind of SIG that's going to, dramatically change her, and that's fine. So awaken her, dupe her a few times, feed her a few SIGs, but this is definitely not the kind of SIG most players, even major Windblade users, will feel any need to get up to a high level. And I have Windblade at rank 6, my Windblade's at SIG 20 something, and that is more than adequate. It's not the kind of SIG that most people will feel that they need to make a very long-term investment in. So that brings us to Cheetor. So his SIG is Feral Strike. This is definitely a game-changing SIG in the sense that it makes Cheetor a lot better, okay? It has a few components. So Feral Strike activates every time he gains a bar of power, which is nice. It has a high activation rate. And it activates for 4 seconds. So it will increase his crit rate. It will give him a 25% chance to evade melees when it's active. And most importantly, it allows him to just literally ignore enemy abilities. This is awesome, okay? The great thing about the SIG is that the ignoring of enemy abilities and the melee evade is exactly the same at SIG 1 and 100. It is only the crit rate that goes up. So at SIG 1, it's about a 10% crit rate that goes up to 40% at SIG 100. So what that means is that at low SIG, it's outstanding, right? It's probably one of the strongest, most useful low SIG signatures in the game, because that ignoring of abilities is just super helpful, right? Because you will get to a bar of power, it activates. You're often going to want to attack and use a special. So when you do, he will ignore things like evasion, armor, resistances, shielding. The list goes on, right? He just completely ignores all enemy abilities during that window, which makes it outstanding for landing specials in particular, right? And so it makes it super useful going up against bots like evade bots, right? You go up against a really pesky, annoying bot like a barricade or a sideswipe or something, who might evade. And, when you launch that special, you launch that attack, they won't evade. Or you go up against a tanky bot. It'll totally ignore their armor. Really useful in time slides against certain kinds of, mods and shields and stuff like that. So it's super, super, super helpful. So if you are a major Cheetor user, if you run Beast Wars, things like that, by all means invest some into his SIG. The increased crit rate will help. He'll crit more often and do more damage. but it does not need to be high sig at all. You could have him at sig 1, sig 5, sig 10, and you're going to get plenty of use out of it with a very high activation rate. And like I said, it really makes Cheetor a much better bot. So that brings us to Scout Bee. So his sig is Bee Brave. This has a couple of components, largely power related. So when Bee is near the opponent in close proximity, he will generate 1.9% power per second at sig 1. That goes up to 4% power at sig 100. He also gets a flat 10% melee buff when he's near the opponent. So this is another one. You look at that and you think, okay, 2% power or whatever. That doesn't seem like much, but that is every second, okay? Scout Bee, obviously very fast-paced, hyperbot, very agile, lots of evading, really good for, short bursts of damage and short to mid-length fights. Because he's generating that power every second when he's near the opponent and he's getting that melee buff, that leads to a lot more power, that leads to a lot more specials. As you can see, it doesn't really scale much. It roughly doubles. But in a sense, that's actually a good thing because it means that you don't have to invest much into it at all, which is particularly helpful given that he is a Titan bot, right? And Titan bots take forever to get to high sig level. So even if you're a very diehard Scout Bee user, you don't need to worry about investing a lot into it. Maybe a little bit, get that power rate up a little, but you're going to find that because it's also an accumulative sig, you're going to be generating tons and tons of power, even at very low sig level. You do not need to worry about making a long-term investment on it. So next up we have Barricade. So his sig is Bad Cop. This is a backfire-related sig, which makes sense because Barricade has a lot of backfire built into his kit, one of the most important parts of it. So it does two things. First of all, when you awaken him, it allows him to stack his backfires. Second of all, it increases his backfire duration. So it's almost like a deep wounds for backfires. So at sig 1, his backfires will have about a 26% increased duration. That goes up to about a 69% increased backfire duration at sig 100. So the good thing about this is that it activates very, very regularly, has a high activation rate because, he can land those backfires with his range shots, his special one. Very important part of his kit. The fact that you can stack them is even better, that leads to more damage. And of course, the increased duration makes them longer, which of course means that you have more chances for the opponents to use specials, and that will do more damage. And then you stack up those backfires, that does even more damage, right? Because it is only a duration-related signature, though, you don't really have to worry about getting it up to a high sig level, because even at fairly low sig, you're getting 30 to 40% increased duration, for example. That adds seconds to his backfires. So most players, even if you use Barricade a lot, will not feel any need to get him up to a very high level. You can invest a little bit into it, and you're going to have the stacking of those backfires, and you're going to have longer backfires, and that's all you really need. So it's a useful sig, high activation rate, does not need to be at very high level in order for it to be beneficial. So that next leads to Sideswipe. So his sig is Maximum Thrust. Unfortunately, Sideswipe sig is one of those rare sigs in the game that only activates once for a brief duration. It is a power generating sig that gives him some passive power gain at the start of the fight. So at sig 1, he's generating approximately 5% power in the first 12 seconds of the fight. I don't have the figure for sig 1, but I know it is approximately 5%, less than 10 for sure. That goes up to a 50% power generation at sig 100, okay? Now, it does go up a lot, but here's the thing. First of all, it's only one time. So you start the fight, right? You charge at the opponent, you generate a bunch of power, you can get up to a special 2 or 3 very quickly, you land it, and then it's over. So it's fun, it helps you out in short fights, but the thing is, short fights are usually pretty easy anyway. In long fights, it's much less useful because it's only activating that one time. You can't reactivate it. And he doesn't even really need it just because of the fact that he already has phenomenal power gain with his evasion on range shots. He can generate tons and tons of power. This is one of the things that makes him so dangerous to fight against. So I understand why they wanted to incorporate power power flow into his SIG. I just wish that they didn't do it this way, because it's a one-time 12-second SIG. That's it. Unfortunately, on top of that, at low SIG, if he's only generating 5 to 10% power, it's not that much anyway, so you would want to invest in it to some degree in order for it to be a sizable enough amount of power for him to get to a special 2 or 3 quickly, if that's what you wanted to do. But by that same token, you don't really want to invest in this SIG. For most people, wouldn't anyway, just because of the fact that you can only use it once, right? So I have a SIG 30 Sideswipe, which generates a little over 20% power. I don't feed him SIGs, I just dupe him sometimes, and that's fine. And like I said, it's fun. It helps you out at the start of the fight, but then it's over, So because it's the kind of SIG that's a one-time deal, most people will not see any need to invest into it. There are far more useful SIGs and far more useful scout SIGs to invest into. This is the kind of SIG that most people are going to derive only minimal benefit from. And like I said, that's particularly true in longer, more difficult fights. So that brings us to Kickback. So his SIG is the T-Clog Sabotage, which he can inflict with his heavies. This does 2 things. First of all, it decreases the opponent's power flow by 30% for 10 seconds. And if the opponent uses a heavy, while they are inflicted with T-Clog, they will become stunned for 2 seconds. Both of those things are pretty useful. It's a very utility sort of SIG, which is perfect because Kickback is all about his utility, right? And obviously power flow, power leaks, all of that kind of thing, very important in his kit. What I like about this SIG is that all you have to do is land a heavy and you have a chance to activate it. That's very easy to do. You can do plenty of heavies. It's pretty long. It's 10 seconds, and 30% reduced power rate is certainly useful. And of course, there are going to be times where the opponent uses a heavy, and then you have a 2-second stun, and it gives you a window to do an attack. So it's certainly very useful. What I also like is that it does not need to be at high level. So at SIG 1, he has a 35% chance to inflict it. That goes up to 80% at SIG 100. So it a little bit more than doubles. What's nice is that even if you just have him at low SIG, he's getting, a 40 to 50% chance, which is plenty fine because, like I said, you can land as many heavies as you want, and you will be able to inflict T-Clog relatively frequently, even at low SIG. So it's not a game-changing SIG. It's just one of those things that kind of helps him out, and it is useful. It's cool. But he has so much utility otherwise anyway. It's not the kind of SIG that's going to dramatically improve him, but it certainly does make certain things easier. It certainly helps him out. So I think for most people, maybe investing a little bit into it, if you use Kickback a lot, that's great, but you do not have to worry at all about getting it up to high level because it's just an RNG-based SIG, and the only thing it's going to do by increasing the SIG level is increase the chance, right? So the power rate and the stun chance are exactly the same regardless. So, he's going to do just fine at low to mid SIG level. So finally, that brings us to Slipstream. So her SIG is Exploit Weakness. This gives her a chance to refresh debuffs with her basic attacks. Her debuffs with her backstabs are obviously very important. She can inflict, the critical resistance, the power rate, and her backfires with her backstabs. The thing about this SIG is that it seems very low in terms of activation rate at low SIG, but there are a few mitigating factors that actually make it a better activation rate than you might think. So at SIG 1, she has a 1% chance to refresh debuffs on the opponent with her basic attacks. That goes up to 50% at SIG 100. So obviously that seems like a very low chance at low SIG, but there are 2 things to bear in mind. Number 1 is that she has a circumstantial bonus, meaning that if the opponent has less than 4 debuffs, which they often will, you get a 20% increased chance. So even at SIG 1, it would be 21%. And at SIG 100, it would be 70%. More importantly, though, she has a chance to refresh those debuffs with all of her basic attacks. And you're obviously landing lots of them. You're doing lots of combos, lots of basic ranged, right? So even at low SIG, particularly when the opponent has less than 4 debuffs, which like I said, they usually will, you're going to have a decent activation rate even at low SIG. Now, Slipstream was badly broken when she came out. She still has a lot of problems, but putting that aside, even when she is working as intended, you will find that this is the kind of SIG that you'll probably want to invest a little bit into. but you're not going to have to invest a whole lot into in order for the refreshing of debuffs to happen pretty reliably. Because the thing is, her backstabs, like I said, you can stack them, you can land multiple of them. They're also 8 seconds long, which is pretty nice. And so if you're able to refresh them, and if you're able to refresh them multiple times, you can keep the opponent in long stretches of being debuffed. That's pretty good. So at low sig, you're still going to be looking at a moderate activation rate. If you were to get her sig high, it would activate very frequently, but that's fine. You don't have to worry about getting her to high sig because of the fact that she will have a chance to refresh those debuffs with every basic attack. And so I'm glad they did that, and I'm also glad that they added the 20% bonus when the opponent has less than 4 debuffs. So it's a useful sig. It will be good for her once she's fully functional. And it's the kind of sig that most people will be perfectly happy with at a low to mid sig level. So that wraps up the Scout class. I will get to the final class, which is the demo class, in the coming days. In the meantime, do take care of yourselves. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will speak again soon.